Okay, idea number one is these ascent accounts, which, there we go. This is from Hekhalot Rabbati, and it's got some interesting stuff in it because it has a story that kind of sets the stage for the ascent of Rabbi Nechunya, but it tells you about that story from the perspective of kind of the setting, the social setting for these things. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So it's kind of what mystics are expected to do. So first of all, there is what is called a company or an order. Okay, that means a group. It's an esoteric group, and generally it is some rabbi who is believed to be a mystic, a tzaddik, has lots of power, and he gets disciples around him, and he can choose to let you in or not. It's not something you can say, "I want to join." It's something he says, "I will accept you as my disciple." Okay, and sometimes these guys would move from master to master, like they'd go with one guy for a few years and then go find another guy, a little just to get as much knowledge as they could give. Okay, the setting of this is the early 2nd century A.D. And Rabbi Ishmael is the disciple of Rabbi Nechunya, and he's got other disciples too, but these are the two that are mentioned. Okay, they are meeting in the temple courtyard. Now, in a sense, this is anachronistic because the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. and Rabbi Ishmael is alive in the early 2nd century A.D. So there's a couple of options of this. One is it's just anachronistic. Second is they're meeting in the ruins of the temple or something like that. But personally, I suspect what they're talking about is the Bar Kokhba rebuilding of the temple. Okay? That is to say, they are associated with the rebuilt temple. And note that Rabbi Ishmael is called by the other rabbis, by rabbinic tradition, he's the last high priest. And my suspicion is what this refers to is that he offered sacrifice in Jerusalem during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Now, this is all highly legendarized in the sources we've got, but I think that's what's going on here. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, the other thing that's going on here is there's degrees of initiation. There's advanced students and there's lesser students. And the advanced students, have a more personal relationship with the master. The lesser ones are just kind of in training. And they have an inner circle of 9 guys. Why 9? Rabbi Nechunya plus 9 equals 10, which is a minyan, which means quorum. And that is the number of Jews required to pray and have a synagogue prayer. Okay? So it is related to that type of an idea.
Well, 9 of the top students, not just like one.
There's 9 top students, and then there's another group don't number them, but there's an outer group. So that's the inner circle. So it's like Jesus and the 12 disciples, right? I mean, it's that type of a thing, the inner circle. So there's lots of disciples of Jesus, but there's 12 special ones. There's lots of disciples of Nechunya, but there's 9 special ones to form this. Now, notice they get together as a group to invoke the name of God, and you have to have 10 guys to do Jewish prayer. So they may have had to have 10 guys to do a mystical ascent thing too. Does that make sense? And you get this idea in Christianity, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, and this is invocation of names and so forth. Then for Jesus it says 2 or 3 can gather in my name, and I will be there. I'll be in the midst of you. But Nechunya needs 10. Okay? Now, there's lots of stuff about divine names and guardian and angelic names. You need to know the names of all these angels and stuff to do the ascent. And they give these names in the book, but what's the problem with the names as they're presented? Okay, they're nomina barbara, which means what? Okay, they don't make any sense. They just, it's like saying abracadabra. It's a word that you use, but it doesn't have a meaning that is at least determinable. The second thing is there's no voweling in these texts. There's no voweling in almost all Jewish texts. So what does that mean?
You don't know how to pronounce it.
You can't pronounce them right unless a master teaches you, right? You've got the name there and you can kind of memorize them, but if you just got the book would not be sufficient for you to do the stuff. So that's part of what's going on with these books is they're intentionally obscure so that you have to have a master interpret them for you. Now, it may be that some of these names were also coded, like backwards or change the orders of the letters. So, it's possible that there's that aspect to it as well. But there's some intentional obscurity in this stuff. It also talks about seals that you have in your hand. Now, what those are is not clear, but some people think they're names. Maybe you write them on your hand, or you have an amulet with it written on it, or it could be numbers or designs. There's lots of magical designs that look something like this. They'll draw lines and that will be it. And what it means is, of course, the secret, and the master will interpret it and tell you what it means, but you won't necessarily get it just by looking at it. So there's some type of seals, maybe gestures, like holding your fingers in a certain way, hand clasping in a certain way, just abstract symbols, numbers, names, all those types of things may be associated with the seals. And some guys think they are physical objects that they hold, and some guys think they may be, something, the way you hold your hand or something like that. Now, another thing about this is Rabbi Nehunya does this ascent. His 9 disciples are around him, and his body remains in the temple. But his mind or soul is ascending into heaven. So notice how these things this is different than the more archaic stuff. You're shifting from, the body going up into heaven to the body remaining on earth and the mind ascending into heaven. They also tell you about the prerequisites. Before you can get into these mystical circles, you have to, number one, keep all the commandments. So these, at least some of these movements, are not antinomial, which means they don't care about the law. Okay. Number 2 is you have to be a completely advanced rabbinic scholar. So in other words, you have to have a PhD in rabbinic lore. That is, you got to know Talmud, you got to know all this stuff. Once you've achieved the PhD, this is like a postdoctoral work that you do. You go on to do the mystical stuff. But ordinary Jews can't do it because, they don't have the full rabbinic knowledge, and any type of unrighteous Jew or marginal Jew can't do it because they don't keep all the commandments. You also have to learn the mystical meaning of the Torah, not just the halakha, rabbinic type stuff, but the mystical stuff behind it as well. So there's actually multiple levels of Torah learning you have to go through. The ordinary, here's the commandment we figure out from this passage of the Torah, and then the mystical meaning of the Torah. Okay? Now, everybody understands these ale names, angelic ale names? Did I explain that? Okay. Schaeffer gets upset about that there's a description of the throne of God in great detail, but no description of God himself. And again, I think that there are intentional layers of esoteric lore that they don't fully explain in the text, so that the text you can't use the text if you don't have the master. So I think this is part of it. That is, the purpose of these visions is for you to see God, and they're not going to describe him because that would be sacrilegious and it would give knowledge to the, if an ordinary person got this manuscript, he might, get knowledge that he shouldn't have or something like that.
So when we have names like Gabriel and Raphael and
They all...
Ariel, are those all our pronunciations of these words that were written that we don't actually know about?
No, those we have in the biblical text of the Torah. We have the original oldest ones had no voweling, but the rabbis eventually wrote down the voweling. That's called the Masoretic text. Masora means voweling or marking, signing. So the Masora are the rabbis adding vowels to the text. So we have that as a source of knowledge of the pronunciation. And they did it basically when people started losing knowledge of the correct pronunciation of Hebrew. They started writing the vowels down. The second thing we have is the Greek translation from the 2nd century BC, where they added the vowels in. And they added the vowels in as it was pronounced by the Greeks, Greek Jews in the 2nd century BC. And then we also have a Latinate version, which is based on that. So our English is based on the Latin, based on the Greek, based on the Hebrew. So there's some variation in that. So a lot of the names we do know, and a lot of them will make sense. Like Raziel is one of these mystical angel names. It means the secret of God, and it's only spelled out. Would be spelled like this. Okay, this is RZY Aleph Lamed. Okay, so it's RZY. Aleph's just a vowel holder, and then the L. So you turn that around, and it spells out Raziel. Now, anybody know Hebrew would be able to pronounce that. They'd know what to pronounce. But if it just came out of some nonsense letters that don't have a meaning in Hebrew, then they wouldn't know how to pronounce it. Okay. So it depends on the angel name. The Nomina Barbara, a Jew couldn't pronounce those even if they knew Hebrew well, because they don't make any sense. This name makes sense in Hebrew. I mean, a Jew would look at that and say, yeah, it's Raziel, the secret of God. Right? See what I'm saying? Or actually, it's probably Aramaic, but does that make sense? Okay. Last thing we need to talk about on this one is the Sar HaTorah, which means the prince of the Torah. Torah is the law, 5 books of Moses, right? The Jews have to know the Torah, basically memorized it, to reach this full rabbinic knowledge level of the PhD level of rabbinic studies. The Sar HaTorah it means the prince, and it refers to an angel who's the angel. The purpose of this angel is to teach you the Torah, and he does it through kind of mystical, magical means. And basically, the idea is if you can get automatic memorization of the whole book without having to study it and repeat it 100 times. So that would obviously be nice. You've got this angel who will give you mastery of the Torah, and also he gives you mastery of the mystical and magical meaning of the Torah, not just that you've memorized it, but you know what it means mystically. So the prince of the Torah is an important guy, important angel, important mystical figure, and there are books about this Sar HaTorah. He's just mentioned in these texts, but there are other mystical books that talk about it a bit more. Okay, any questions on that stuff? Then let's look at just a couple of issues here with the last section of Schaeffer. We'll just talk about a couple of things, and then we'll move on to the review. She'ur Koma, what's that? This is a very strange thing and book. She'ur Koma means the measurement of the body of God, okay? And basically, it is an idea that floats around in mystical lore, and it is also a book in itself. There's a book called She'ur Koma. What it includes is a description of God's body, including every part of the body, his eyebrows, his genitals. I mean, you just go on through it. Everything is measured. And he's gigantic. He's like 10,000 miles tall or something like that. They measure them in parsangs, which is a Persian measurement, about 4 miles. But, his finger is 1,000 parsangs. Go on and on like this. And it measures every little bit, his eyebrows, his nose, and this giant description. So you're getting 2 things here. One is God as a super gigantic creature. Now, why would they think God is a super gigantic creature? Well, there are angels that are described in some of this lore as being gigantic angels, and God must be bigger and more powerful than them, is one thing.
This is from 306 AD, is that what that is?
No, that's the pages in Schaeffer where this is discussed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
What period is this from?
This, I think, is 6th, 7th century AD. It's hard to date some of these books because they have no real historical reference. Now, part of this may be anthropomorphism of God. Part of it is that they may be describing Adam Kadmon, who is this primordial prototypical man, not Adam of the garden, but Adam Kadmon is primordial Adam, and it kind of encompasses the whole world. There's also language in Paul that talks about Christians as being part of the body of Christ, and that is probably allegorical in Paul, but some literalists might say, we are part of God's body. God's body is, God encompasses the whole cosmos, so his body must be as big as the cosmos, that type of an idea. Okay, so that's one thing of it. The other part of it is each of the limbs have a name associated with them, and they're all nomina barbara. Okay, so it sounds like gibberish. So there's something going on here, but nobody quite knows what. Okay?
And is this commonly used among mystical?
Not nowadays. This is an old text. Basically, you get all these old ideas, and by 1300, they are all superseded by Zohar, and then by Lurianic. So these are prototypical mystical texts. They're still around, but most Jewish mystics wouldn't worry about this too much. They'd just say, well, it's just an old thing and we don't know what it means. Yeah?
So with the Zohar that we lose, like, all anthropomorphism of God?
You don't lose it, but it's completely allegorically explained. Okay? It's not, but it doesn't disappear. They still talk about it in those terms, but... the last thing is this idea of the transfiguration of Enoch into Metatron, which we've talked about before. In 3rd Enoch, this is essentially deification. That is, he's described as being exactly like God. And, he's got God's clothes, he's got God's crown, he sits on a throne, he's got God's name, he's called the little Yahweh, Yahweh Patan. And so, we're looking at deification here in practical sense, or literal sense, I should say. But we also need to recognize that this is associated with Christ. That is, the Christians are saying Christ sits on the right hand of God. Christ, wears the robe of God and the crown of God. This is all from the book of Revelation and then later Christian interpretations. And the Jews say, no, it's not Christ, it's Enoch. And so you get kind of a rivalry of who is the second God up in heaven. Now remember, the rabbis get really mad about this. This is the two powers in heaven heresy, right? Enoch is not God. So in one sense he's described as being God. In another sense he's rejected as it. So they were pretty ambivalent about this idea. But it is essentially Christ's not a replacement for Christ, but the alternative to Christ, that is, within mystical circles. And it's probably related to Hebrew 1, 3-4, where you've got a description of the deification of Christ and how he's greater than the angels and has the name above all names and all sorts of stuff like that. Okay? So just be aware of those two things. Now, any questions about stuff? Okay, we now need to turn to the